All right. Live or recording live, I should say. A little bit
It's
remote
live one
today.
way or another. There's no
Yeah,
going back.
it's live-ish. So cool. Well, hey guys, welcome to the party. We're here on another episode, another week, another fun-filled week of cybersecurity activities and news and whatnot. Had a few things we kind of wanted to just kind of talk about. I think we kind of wanted to go over some of the interesting news around, Viasat, update on kind of Okta, talk a little bit about third party, vendors and kind of compliance around that and your trusted partners. So yeah, I don't know, Brian, you kind of mentioned the third party portion of, third party access and vendors and things like that. So you have a couple things you want to start us off with?
Definitely. So, I hate to go back to the target breach, but you kind of go back to some of that with the third party risk assessments, etc. So just because somebody has a SOC 2 and they might be compliant, etc., doesn't mean that you've maybe worked through all your third party risk. So it's important to evaluate what type of access do these third parties have to your environment. What's the criticality to your business if they're not available? Because something could happen to the third party where maybe they can't service something anymore. And so, what are you really doing to evaluate that risk and score and understand your third party companies that you work with? And then, what are they doing to identify risk in their environment, right? So, yeah, that's just a couple of thoughts there wrapped around it. I think a lot of people will just look for that compliance checkbox, but what is that IR plan between both companies? What's that SLA, and are they going to hire somebody to investigate things and do it in a timely manner? I think that's some of the questions that we've been seeing pop up in the news feeds the last several days. So just important to consider and think about, and really think through the business process too. Like supply chain has been a big topic for the last 2 years
Yeah.
with third party risk, and can I get the parts that I need to make my widget? I don't know, right? And then, oh, I'm delayed, and then that delays me delivering my product to the next person. So what does that impact downstream on both sides of the table? So yeah, it's not always a cyber security issue per se, but a lot of times we are seeing more and more of this occur, where the leverage comes in through a different type of party that has elevated access, and then what are you doing to monitor and control all of that as well?
Yeah, I think you're going to see and kind of continue to see this in the whole trending of, outsourcing and leveraging your partner network and ecosystem where, ultimately it kind of comes back to who owns the risk, who owns what, who's responsible for this. I mean, there's, tons of contracts in play, and sometimes you have, two and three tier type chains, right? Where, at these large companies, they might have a certain contractor and that contractor may have two or three people underneath them as well. So you have this kind of multiple chain of command, if you will, and who's really watching that, who's managing it, and I mean ultimately it's your job as your customer and your provider and your company and your data at the end of the day to protect it and ask these questions and like you said, you're like, hey, not just show me some piece of paper, but actually question it and say, no, I want to talk to your CISO equivalent or whoever that might be and understand what things are and how that kind of works, right? So you can't just kind of bury your head in the sand. And we've seen so many different types of attacks around this, and just not necessarily attacks, but exploits and targets around this that is going to kind of really continue. I think that we've seen so far, and it's not gonna stop anytime soon. That that's for sure. So
Yeah, something that comes to mind too is privileged access management, right? Having just in time access to just the right information that you need to work on. So, in a scenario, if you're working a ticket that comes in and you're a contractor, why do you need access to everybody's accounts,
yeah.
right? So, you should have access just like when that ticket comes in, you're privileged just to work on that specific account and not any other ones. Is another way, and all that ties back to the big topics of zero trust and the White House trying to push that type of topic, and we're seeing the government take that serious, right? Some of the directives that they're working to, and so private industry needs to start taking note of that as well.
Yeah, I think Brian, we'll go back to your point a little bit about privileged access management. Like those things are, fantastic ideas and great concepts and things, we kind of always talk to people about. But I think it's another thing too. It's like, some of the stuff is very complicated to put in. So a lot of teams are already strapped thin, and they're under budget, overwhelmed already, kind of just keeping their fingers in so-called plugs, if you will. But I think there's a lot of things that you can do from a basic perspective. To your point, is hey, let's just maybe not allow everybody full access to the network, right? Or at least like lock certain things down, or at least perform more audits and ask these questions. As the industry kind of matures and ramps up towards that, truly zero trust, just in time type of access, which I think everyone would like, love to get to. It just takes, time and money, as we all know, right?
Oh yeah. I still have a mark on my head right up here where I banged it one time when I realized 87 people had domain admin access,
Oh, wow.
right? And I shouldn't just say people, it was 87 accounts that had access to domain admin at a previous place. And so that was just, yeah, it was mind boggling. Like I literally just dropped it on the table. It's like, I can't believe we have 87 people. Like, not everybody needs that level of access. But the
Yeah.
culture was, don't block me from doing my work.
Yeah.
Right.
And
And
then
so
like
changing the
security would kind of
culture was
come.
part of it.
Yeah. Security would always come like to kind of ruin the fun, so to speak, and lock things down, where people just wanted to like, hey, no, let me do my thing. And maybe many years ago that was kind of okay, but now it doesn't work that way anymore, right? So we have to kind of really change how we do things. And the bigger question would be, in that group of 87, how many were no longer with the company? I mean, obviously don't answer, but that'll be another scary stat.
Well, not only that, but like, how many really even needed to be in there? Maybe four,
Yeah.
five tops. Like, yeah, you always need to have break glass and the ability to have enough people that aren't at the same conference or whatever
Right.
for that division of responsibility. But yeah, when you get down to what their work function really was, they didn't need that level of access. It did not
Yeah.
stop them from doing their day to day.
Uh,
Go ahead.
uh, Not to mention, there are different domain admins that really only require certain access to certain things to administrate or certain systems to administrate. It doesn't. You don't necessarily need all domain admins to have access to every aspect of the environment. So just breaking it down even further, so that you maybe move some of those domain admins into groups that are still high privileged, but only are restricted to certain systems, so they're not necessarily domain admins anymore, right? Is a way to kind of break that down, and that requires a little bit of triaging and a little bit of asset management in terms of the employees and users, but through certain IAM efforts, you can kind of start to trim the fat there. And then another thing is service accounts. A lot of people forget that
Oh, yeah.
those come enabled by default with certain elevated privileges with certain systems. So and often people don't even recognize that those exist or upon installation. So another thing is going through and just I guess ensuring the typical life cycle of an account is fulfilled and that accounts are being terminated and reviewed on a regular basis. Usually, people just kind of set and forget these things and don't actually review the users and their access on any kind of regular occurrence, a
I
reoccurring basis.
I think one of my favorites is when everyone uses like the administrator account for everything. Service account. They hook it into like everything you could think of, and you go through and change it, and like half the world breaks. And it's like, yeah, that thing is hooked into all kinds of stuff it really shouldn't be into.
Hey,
Exactly.
I know I'm guilty of using my own admin account in the past as a service account. And
Yeah.
then something goes from, oh, it's just a proof of concept to in production and then it breaks. Right. I
Yeah.
think a lot of people have done it in their career, but
Oh, for sure.
my lesson learned from that particular instance was always create a service account, even if it's a proof of concept, because it might make it into production.
Yeah.
So you just have
Ch-
to train yourself, do it the right way the first time.
Chances are high on that kind of stuff usually. So, another article that came out a couple days ago, or actually just yesterday, over on Krebs, was the power of the so-called fake subpoena here and the emergency data request, the EDRs. This was a really great article, and actually super scary about how these subpoenas work, and how people are leveraging from certain police accounts, if you will, or officially government looking accounts, to subpoena information, IPs, records from lots of companies, right? Google, Facebook, Uber, Discord in there, Snapchat, thousands of these things potentially over the course of, years. Very scary kind of social engineering aspect here, and just shows that there's a lot of abuse being had in this information, for using it for probably part of bigger campaigns, even, or getting access to certain sensitive information that could be used for, targeted spear phishing type campaigns. Just, overall, very, very troubling on kind of seeing these things come to light here. I know, Sammy, what are your kind of thoughts on that one?
Yeah, it's certainly an advanced form of social engineering. And of course, it does rely on some pre-existing access. But I think that regardless, the fact is that it's very difficult, if not almost impossible in some cases, to distinguish these attacks. And so even if the kind of prerequisites are high, the impact of potentially exploiting this kind of issue is really high, because ultimately they'll have unrestricted access to pretty damaging data that can either be used to further their attacks, or be used to harm that person specifically. And I think there was a few stories that came out involving this kind of thing, which resulted in acquiring access to a user's phone records, and eventually through SIM swapping, they were able to impersonate the user, and then create fake bomb threats, then resulting in physical retaliation by local law enforcement. And then in that, essentially, if their goal is to disrupt their target, they essentially did it through those means. And then, between that and the fact that there's no kind of global registrar for online identity for law enforcement, there's really no way for organizations that are trying to comply to, with certainty, know that they're communicating with an authentic member of law enforcement. So it's a precarious situation, and it doesn't really have a silver bullet solution.
Yeah, I think also what made it kind of scary too is if you read through the article, it said that a lot of these times, because they use it's like a full-on emergency, and they state, hey, life or death, or imminent kind of threat, that most of these companies respond within like an hour or so or less to this information. So it's like, wow, these things are kind of just coming out of nowhere. Information is being handed over, almost immediately without further validation, and that kind of furthers the problem, like you're saying, is who becomes this kind of central authority of who can make these requests, and does it go to the FBI? But even then, how would they know that the police, or these so-called police and other agencies, are actually requesting this information and whatnot? I think there was something like 18,000 different police districts out there, or what it was. So those would need to be validated as well. So if it takes one account in those 18,000 to request these types of EDRs, it just shows you how much information is out there, and how terrifying this thing can really be, and just raises the whole question of, like, which is a much bigger conversation, like identity on the internet, and like what that really means, and how do you identify who becomes the central repository, if you will. And it's a whole interesting kind of theater on what that could look like. So
You just answered all the questions why you don't want to vote online.
that's true. Who's going to identify that whole thing, right? So
I mean, where my head goes is that you have a pre-registered portal where this stuff is already dialed in, but then it doesn't, in this online world, it doesn't guarantee that the person on the other side hasn't compromised somebody else's credentials. So
yeah,
yeah.
Right.
comes back to that. Oh,
Yeah. Well, I was just gonna say, it's like you almost the solution is almost somewhat uncomfortable, because you would have to use some kind of like real time, basically, biosignature to really be able to know for sure that this is the person that you're talking to. Because if essentially it sounds like a lot of these are transacted over electronic communications like email.
mhm.
There were suggestions of using digital signature, but it doesn't matter if you get compromised, if the account itself gets compromised, and they are able to pillage that kind of information. So they're still impersonating you, and even if they give you a call, um, unless there's like a certain pre-established, I guess, means of providing authentication, then the only remaining way would be some kind of bio-based signature. And then you would have to get the cooperation of all the law enforcement involved, and then
Yeah.
who secures that repository? Who secures that database?
It's just never ending. It just goes up the stack, right?
Right. And someone has to hold the keys at the end of the day, and that person kind of has to be incorruptible. So,
Maybe we can use QR codes. Just
yeah,
kidding.
that's never been hacked before.
Yeah. I mean, so like, I mean, kind of diving into this a little bit deeper. I mean, like, do you see, and we're kind of derail this a little bit, but like, do you see like a use for this where like something like a blockchain type of technology could be used for these types of identification requests or just identity in general?
Yeah. I certainly think there's probably some applications, just based on kind of the nature of the blockchain and the immutable aspects of it. You likely could come up with a solution using that to help identify these individuals during EDR requests. But yeah, I don't have the answer as to how that would look, but
Too
certainly
many
I
what
think
ifs, I
just
know.
well, it's certainly, I think, with just considering the applications that you already kind of see, it would be along the same vein. I think it would be a matter of, ensuring that the other end of that, because it likely leak back to either a key or some physical token, ensuring that doesn't get compromised, right? And so I guess maybe that's the larger issue at hand here.
Yeah. Wild stuff that's not going to be solved in a day. Unfortunately, this is going to take, years and years to kind of solve this type of digital identity. And it's going to take a mix of probably public and private sector to really solve this intelligently and smartly to figure out what that looks like. So
Yes, I think
until
definitely
then, the risk goes.
a lot of cooperation is going to be needed for this kind of thing. I think it's top of mind for a lot of people right now because it's just such a gaping hole. I mean, it can there's really no mitigation to it. If someone right now
Yeah.
goes and compromises a lot, local law enforcement and requests this data based on some false narrative, it's very it's bad. So we'll see how we mobilize towards making those policy changes.
Yeah, I mean, if you put the concept of like, hey, this is a life or death situation, please respond immediately. If you're sitting there in your office and you're like, I don't want this maybe blood on my hands, so to speak. Sure, I'll just give the information up. And it's like, oh crap, I probably shouldn't have done that. It's a weird moral thing you're kind of getting into and playing on people's fears of, someone's life in your hands, so to speak. So it's a very scary social engineering aspect, but powerful. Okay. Another story here that kind of hits close to home for some of us in San Diego is the details came out from Viasat a little bit more in depth about the recent so-called cyber attack against one of their KA satellites for disruption of a lot of service over in Ukraine and that part of the world. It's pretty interesting, what they documented, what they shown, partial DOS attack, and then essentially gaining access via a potentially compromised VPN network, and rendering a lot of these CPE kind of modems useless, right? Not really breaking into a supply chain, so to speak, from the actual chipset or switches on chip, but sounds like more issuing a very destructive, hey, erase all command, and then causing these things to just be wiped out. Yeah, very interesting kind of story and how they rolled through and just shown this, and it just shows how these large communication providers with what's happening in with heightened cyber tension with Russia and Ukraine and just in general, are really these big targets here. So there was another ISP I think we talked about a couple of days ago. They were also a target of another type of cyber attack. So yeah, these large internet providers and satellite providers are going to, I think, continue to be hot topics of target here for disrupting communications and just trying to cause general chaos out there on this one.
Yeah, I mean, you think about government and military being out into the field, and they rely on these type of communications. I know they say that government wasn't
Yeah.
impacted, so I think you just showed some cards that maybe that's a different network,
Yeah.
if you will. But who says that maybe because of different protocols and processes, the remediation efforts can't be done on that network as fast as the other network, and the attackers know this type of thing. So I don't know, it just kind of brings that to light a little bit as well. But it is a critical piece of communication, because we don't have a wire everywhere. And
That's right.
wireless cell phone, like, we take for granted that our cell phone's going to work wherever we go
Yeah.
nowadays, right? You can get on a cruise ship and it's going to work on the cruise ship because they're emitting out a signal. Yes, you're roaming on a different carrier, but you
Yeah.
can't always communicate that way. And that's where the satellite comes in and closes that gap today.
Yeah, and to me, the craziest part is just like the intent of the attack, just pure disruption. Just kind of speaks to the state of the of global cybersecurity, and where we have to start thinking about in terms of mitigation. I think when you go through a lot of B2B kind of cybersecurity cycles, a lot of it revolves around mitigating risk involving like data loss and maybe like some of the financial risk involved, but never really speaks like denial of service things often get kind of overlooked because it's like, oh, well, who's really going to do that, right? Like who's just going to come in here with the intent to break stuff? It's like a very specific type of person,
Yeah.
but in today's climate, it's extremely relevant. So I'm to me, that was like one of the things I took away from it that kind of stood out was, when you have major telecommunication providers like Viasat being hit with purely service disrupting level attacks, it's to me it signals like another need for or a higher need for increased hygiene, not just minimal check the box, but truly batten the hatches type of approach.
Yeah,
So
because we've also seen, like to your point, other very disruptive, malware and things like that that are really just generally designed to cause chaos, right? Not even ransomware. It's like, hey, no, the goal is to just destroy as much as possible. Wipergate or Whispergate, whatever it's being called, was one of them, and a few others out there. So this is kind of that same boat. It's like, hey, let's just disrupt communications flat out is really what they're looking to do, right? So it all links together in this just disruptive behavior, and we're going to see more and more of this for sure in these kind of modern cyber warfare type times we are living in.
yep. And guess who was involved in the investigation?
Mandiant,
Yep.
saw that too. It was interesting. So
Even
they've
more
been,
reason Google wants them now, right?
yeah, they've been involved in a lot of these high profile cases the last few months here, so I'm sure they've gathered a lot of interesting intel and insight into what's really happening. So
Well, and truth be told, I am excited to see some of the efforts and innovations that'll come out of security from having that much access to that much data processing. You know what I mean? And having it's a lot of security is limited by compute power, and
Mhm.
there sure is no shortage of that there. So it'll be very curious to see what they pull from all of these different events and what kind of autonomous systems arise as a result of it.
yeah, that's a really good point, right? I think, as we kind of gather, like just like the industry in general gathers this type of information, it sees new attacks, sees new vectors, sees new way to defend or see things. It also means that we can kind of start building better defenses and understand more about how things work to build around that. So I think overall, the overall cybersecurity industry should benefit from this and learn a lot. These last couple years are probably worth 10 plus years of innovation in the cybersecurity front, like in my opinion on that, so on stuff like that.
The unfortunate part is that history keeps repeating itself. So, it's whack-a-mole, but then people forget about the old vulnerabilities and they never go address them.
Yeah, like what do you mean you still have XT running your network? Oh, you probably do. So go fix that.
Exactly.
It's tried and true.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that'll come with that'll always come with a certain degree of just compliance, because compliance is good because it allows us to create a standard, but at the same time it can also create laziness, because it lulls us into a false sense of security. But we often feel that by reaching the minimum standards, which don't always address certain things, like even even some of the most distinguished standards, some of them don't even tell you how or require you to penetration test, for example, right? And then if you don't do that, how are you ever going to have an idea of the Windows system that is from 2001 sitting on your environment, like you mentioned with Brian? So yeah, I think a lot of it will come from breaking out of that check the box mindset and really thinking about security from the perspective of you know a want to do, not a need to do.
Yeah, it's kind of like the whole saying, almost like if you kind of have to be willing to change, like people say that like about themselves, or like, hey, I want to make this big change in myself, or I want to start going to the gym, or whatever it is, or I want to do X, Y, Z. It's kind of almost the same thing in cybersecurity. Like you have to want to change your approach to the way you've been doing it for forever, right? It's like, hey, no, like we want to take this serious now and do all these steps. And man, even just doing like, 4 or 5 basic things really well will put you probably so far ahead. And just, as Brian always says, like back to basic stuff. I mean, it's sad, but it's true to so much extent. So that's a good way to kind of look at it.
Agreed.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining. I think it was a great show and some good content here. And thanks to you for watching, subscribing. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, post, ask comments, questions, all that good stuff. And we'll see you guys soon.
All right. See you guys.
Take care. Bye.